7 times she had sat in that same chair, and 7 times the same word had crossed the desk, like a door pulled shut in her face. The 8th time, she did not bring a folder. She brought a girl. Rennie Carter was 41 years old, and she had been making sweet potato pies in a kitchen the size of a closet for most of her adult life. She made them for church suppers and for funerals, and for the women on her block who could not get out of bed the week after a baby came. She made them for cash, when cash was the only thing standing between her and the light bill. For 11 years, she had told herself the same quiet thing every morning, which was that one day the little hand-lettered sign she'd take to a folding table at the Saturday market would say something bigger than her name. One day it would say a store, one day it would say hers. The bank on Drayton Street was where she went to ask for that day. The first time she wore the navy dress she kept for interviews and for the Times, the school called her in. She brought a spiral notebook with every number written by hand, what a commercial oven cost, what the rent on the empty storefront beside the laundromat would run, what she could clear in a month if the market crowds held. The loan officer was a young man named Davis Pruitt, who had a way of smiling without any of it reaching his eyes. He looked at her notebook the way a man looks at a child's drawing. He said the words collateral and credit history and risk profile, and then he said no, and he said it gently, the way you would tell someone the weather. She thanked him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The second time, she brought bank statements, every page she could get the machine at the library to print, and she laid them out flat on the desk so Pruitt would not have to bend to read them, and she watched him not read them. The third time she brought a letter from the church on the pastor's own stationery and a letter from Joy's school, where she had volunteered in the cafeteria for 2 years, and a stack of order slips rubber-banded together, 2 years of them, proof that people would drive across town and pay $18 for a pie with her name on the box. He thumbed the slips like a deck of cards he had no intention of dealing. The fourth time she brought her tax returns both years and a budget she had stayed up until 2 in the morning building, and he told her the numbers were fine, that the numbers had never been the problem, and when she asked him then what the problem was, he looked at a spot above her head and said the word profile again, and she understood that the problem was her and that there was no document in the world that fixed being her. The fifth time she brought a co-signer, her cousin Marcus, who drove a delivery route and had a credit score, and sat beside her in a clean press shirt with his hands folded on the desk and said, "This woman is the hardest worker I have ever known in my life, and I have known some workers." The bank said no to both of them. The sixth time she came alone again because Marcus had used up the only favor he had to give and could not afford to put his own name near another no. The seventh time she almost did not come at all, and she sat in the car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before she made herself walk in, and when it was over she sat in the same car for 20 more. Each time the answer was the same, and each time it was delivered a little more quickly, as though the outcome had been decided before she sat down, and the meeting was only a courtesy. Nobody was being paid enough to perform. By the fifth time, she had stopped expecting yes. By the seventh, she had started to wonder whether the wanting itself was the foolish thing, whether a woman like her had any business holding a dream that needed a stranger's signature to live. What none of them at that bank understood, what not one of them on the other side of that desk had bothered to learn, was that they had been turning away the same woman for 3 years while a man they all answered to had been eating her pie every Sunday of his life. That part comes later, though. Stay with her a while first, because the waiting is the part that matters. Renee lived in a rented half of a house on Cleburne Avenue with her daughter Joy, who was 9, and with the framed photograph of her late husband, Curtis, that sat on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light hit it first. Curtis had been a long-haul driver. He had died 4 years before this story on a stretch of interstate outside Knoxville, when a truck going the other way crossed a median that should have held. He left Renee with a girl who had his exact laugh and a life insurance check that had felt, for about a week, like a door opening, and then had drained away into the things grief costs that nobody warns you about, the funeral, the back rent, the months when she could not lift her arms to work. By the time she could work again, the money was gone, and what was left was the recipe. The recipe had come from Curtis's mother, Emile, who had passed it to Renee the way some families pass down a wedding ring, sitting her down at a scarred table and making her write nothing, because, Camille said, "A thing you write down is a thing you can lose, and a thing you learn with your hands stays with you until they bury you." So Renee learned it with her hands over a whole autumn, standing at Camille's elbow while the old woman watched the butter and would not let her look away from it. The brown sugar browned in the butter first, just to the edge of burning, where the smell changes and gets a little dangerous. And that was the secret. That single risky minute that most people were too afraid to wait through. Camille used to say that most people lived their whole lives the way most people made pie, pulling the sugar off the heat too soon, settling for sweet because they were afraid of the dark place right before the good place. She made Renee ruin 4 batches, learning to trust that minute. On the 5th, the old woman tasted it and closed her eyes and said, "There she is," and never corrected her again. Camille had died the same winter as Curtis. Renee sometimes thought the recipe was the last living thing the two of them had left her, and she tended it like it was. She baked at night after Joy was asleep, because the oven was old and ran the electric bill up, and because the apartment got too hot to sleep in anyway once it was going. The kitchen was small enough that she could touch both walls at once, and she had worked out a choreography in it over the years. The bowl here, the cooling rack on the back of the stove, the boxes flattened and stacked on top of the refrigerator where Joy could not reach them. She knew the oven the way you know a difficult relative. It ran 20 degrees hot on the left, and she turned every pie a half turn at the 11-minute mark to keep the crust honest. She washed each dish as she finished with it because there was no counter to leave them on. She sold at the market on Saturday from a folding table under a blue tarp she had bought for $9, and she had patched the tarp twice, and she kept the patches turned to the back where the customers would not see them. She kept her money in a coffee can, and then, when the coffee can felt foolish, in a savings account that never had enough in it to stop feeling like a coffee can, she prayed at night, not for money exactly, but for a door. Just one door. She told God she would do all the walking herself if he would only show her where the door was. She did not know that the door had been sitting in her own kitchen for 2 years, eating a slice off a saucer with a cup of black coffee, telling her the brown sugar was browned just right. His name was Walter Hale, and on the days Renee saw him, he was just an old man who came to the market. He came most Saturdays. He was tall and a little stooped, with close-cut white hair and a way of standing back from a table and watching the people at it before he ever spoke. He always wore the same brown coat, a good coat once, worn soft at the cuffs now, and he carried his money in a billfold that he opened carefully, like the bills inside were the last he had. He bought 1 pie. He always paid the full price and waved off the dollar she tried to give back when he was a regular. He talked to her about the weather and about her girl, who sometimes sat under the table doing homework, and once, when Joy had a fever and Renee mentioned it, he came back the next week and asked after the child by name before he said anything else. Renee liked him. She thought of him, when she thought of him at all, as the lonely old man in the brown coat, and she always cut his slice a little bigger, and she never once thought to ask what he had done with his life or what he did with the rest of his week. He was kind to her, and she was kind to him, and that she believed was the whole of it. What she did not know was that the brown coat was a habit and not a need. What she did not know was that Walter had built, over 50 years, a company that put his name on the side of trucks she had probably passed on the interstate without ever looking up. The same kind of truck, on the same kind of road that had taken Curtis from her, though neither of them would ever know to grieve the overlap. What she did not know was that the bank on Drayton Street, the one that had told her no 7 times, sat inside a building his company had financed, run by men who had learned their manners trying to keep his accounts. What she did not know was that Walter had buried his own wife the spring before he ever tasted that first pie, and that the reason an old rich man drove across town every Saturday to stand at a folding table under a blue tarp was that his wife, Lurleen, had made a sweet potato pie that browned the sugar that same dangerous way, on a stove in a kitchen that had grown around them over 40 years of marriage, and that the first time Walter tasted Renee's standing in the cold with a paper napkin, he had to walk back to his car and sit there a while before he could trust himself to drive. It was not that it tasted like hers, it was that it tasted like the minute before the smoke alarm, the minute Lurleen used to stand guard over with a wooden spoon in her hand, the minute he had thought was gone out of the world forever. He had been looking for that taste for a year. He had eaten pie at every church bake sale and every diner and every supermarket bakery in 3 counties, and it had all been sweet and safe and wrong. He had found what he was looking for at a folding table that belonged to a woman the world had decided was not worth a loan. Walter was not a man who did things quickly. He had made his money by watching, by being patient, by knowing the difference between a person who works hard when someone is looking and a person who works hard because she does not know how to do anything else. So he watched Renee. He watched her cut a bigger slice for an old man in a worn coat who she had no reason to believe could do anything for her. He watched her give a pie once to a young mother who counted out her change twice and still came up short, and watched her press the box into the girl's hands and say it was the end of the day and it would only go to waste, which was a lie, because Renee never had any waste. He watched her wave off a man who tried to haggle her down from $18, not with anger, but with a smile and a steadiness, the way she had waved off Davis's pity 7 times, because she had decided a long time ago what her work was worth, and she was not going to be talked out of it by anyone, rich or poor. He watched her teach Joy to count the cash box at the end of the day, the girl's lips moving over the bills, and watch Renee correct her gently and make her do it again, and understood that he was looking at a woman who was raising her daughter inside the business, the way Camille had raised her, inside the recipe, by the hands, so it could never be lost. He watched her, week after week, be exactly the same person, whether the market was crowded or empty, whether the day had gone well, or whether she was packing up half her pies unsold, and you could see the arithmetic of the light bill moving behind her eyes. Once he watched her stand alone at her table in a hard wind, both hands flat on the top to keep it from going, hair coming loose, refusing to leave early when every other vendor had folded, and he thought, that is a woman who has never once been given a reason to believe the world will meet her halfway, and who shows up anyway. He did not know yet that she had been turned away from his own bank. He would find that out, and when he did, the patience would go out of him for the first time in years. It happened on an ordinary Saturday in March when the market was thin because of a cold rain, and Renee was the only vendor on her row who had bothered to come. Walter came too, because Walter always came. He stood under the edge of her tarp to stay out of the rain, and he asked her the way you ask a question you already half know the answer to, how the dream was coming, the store she had told him about once a long time ago, and Renee, tired, soaked through at the shoulders, lower than she liked to let anyone see her, told him the truth. She told him about the bank. She told him about the 7 times. She told him the young man with a smile that did not reach his eyes had said, the last time, that maybe she should consider whether she was the kind of person a bank could help, and that she had thanked him and walked out into the rain and sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before she could see well enough to drive. She was not asking Walter for anything. She did not think there was anything an old man in a brown coat could do, and even if she had thought it, she would not have asked. Because asking had cost her something each of the 7 times, and she had a little less of it to spend now. She was just tired, and he had asked, and sometimes you tell the truth to a kind face because you've been carrying it alone too long, and because the rain on the tarp was loud enough that it felt almost private, like a confessional, like the words might not leave the space under the blue plastic where the two of them stood. Walter listened to all of it without saying a word. Then he asked her one question. He asked her the name of the bank. When she told him, something moved across his face that she did not understand and would not understand. For 3 more weeks, he nodded slowly. He bought his pie. He paid the full price. And this time, when she tried to wave the dollar back, he closed a hand around it and said, "You keep that. You are going to need to learn to take what you are owed." Then he walked out into the rain to a car she had never seen because she had never once watched him leave. And he sat in it for a long moment, and then he made a telephone call. The man who ran the bank on Drayton Street was named Davis, the same young loan officer who had grown up into a branch manager in the years Renee had been coming through his doors. He took the call, standing up, The way you take a call when the name on the screen makes your mouth go dry. He had met Walter exactly twice in his life, both times at functions where men like Davis stood near the wall with a drink they were not drinking and hoped to be noticed. He had not been noticed. He had rehearsed, both times, a thing he would say if Walter ever came within speaking distance, something about the regional outlook, something that would mark him as a man going places, and both times the moment had passed him by and he had driven home, turning the unsaid sentence over and over like a stone in his pocket. He had not, it seemed, been noticed by a great many of the people he most wanted to impress, and he had taken that particular ache out, over the years, on the people who came to his desk with handwritten notebooks and no collateral and too much hope, because a man who feels small will sometimes look for someone smaller, and a desk is a convenient height to look down from. He had told himself it was prudence. He had told himself he was protecting the bank. He had a word for everything he did, and the words had let him sleep. Walter did not raise his voice on the telephone. Walter never raised his voice. He simply asked Davis whether the bank had, on 7 separate occasions over 3 years, declined a loan application from a woman named Renee. He asked it in the tone of a man who already knew, who was holding the file in his memory the way he held everything, and who was giving the younger man one chance to tell the truth. Davis, to his credit, did not lie. He said he would have to pull the records. Walter said he should do that. Walter said he would be in on Monday, and that he would like the records on the desk when he arrived, and that he would like, also, to understand the reasoning, in writing, signed, for each of the 7 times. Then Walter hung up, and Davis sat down very slowly in his chair and understood, the way you understand a thing, all at once and too late, that he had spent 3 years being unforgivably small to the favourite person of the richest, most influential man who had ever known his name. Renee knew none of this. She went home that Saturday in the rain, and she made pies that night, the way she made them every night, and she kissed Joy's forehead, and she set Curtis's photograph straight on the windowsill, the way she did when the day had been hard, as though he could see better if the frame was level. She told him about the old man who had asked after the dream, and she told him she had said too much. And she told him, the way she told him most things, in a low voice over the running water while she washed the bowl. She had no idea that anything in her life had changed. She had told her trouble to an old man, and the old man had bought a pie. And that was, as far as she knew, the end of it. For the next 2 weeks nothing happened that she could see, and the not happening was its own kind of weight, because she had let herself feel for one foolish minute under the tarp that telling someone might matter, and it had not, and she was angry at herself for the hope the way you are angry at yourself for a bruise you should have seen coming. She went back to the market the next Saturday, and Walter was not there, and she told herself she was not looking for him, and she was looking for him. He was not there the Saturday after that either. She decided he had been embarrassed for her, that she had made the kind old man uncomfortable with her troubles, and she added that to the list of small private shames she kept and did not show anyone, and she pulled the tarp down a little lower over her table and went on. Then on a Thursday the bank called her. It was not Davis, it was a woman, an assistant, who said that the branch wished to revisit her application, and would she be able to come in on Friday at 10. Renee held the phone and felt her heart go hard and careful in her chest, because she had been to that building 8 times now, and she knew what the inside of a no felt like, and she had promised herself after the 7th that she would not go back and let them do it to her again. She almost said no. She almost hung up the phone and kept her dignity, which was the one thing she had managed to keep. Then she thought about the storefront beside the laundromat, which she had walked past 100 times and which still had the same yellowed FOR sign curling in the window, and she thought about Joy, and she thought about the thing Walter had said in the rain, that she was going to need to learn to take what she was owed. So she said yes. She said she would be there at 10. She did not sleep much Thursday night. She baked instead 4 pies, and the smell of the browning sugar filled the little apartment, and somewhere in the middle of it she made a decision that she could not entirely explain to herself, which was that she was not going to walk into that bank on Friday the way she had walked in the other 7 times, with her numbers and her hope held out in front of her like a beggar's cup. She was going to walk in with a pie. And she was going to walk in with her daughter because Joy had a teacher day off from school, and because Renee had decided that whatever happened in that building, her girl was going to see her mother walk in with her back straight one more time, and that if it was going to be another no, then Joy would at least learn how a person takes a no without bending, and if it was going to be something else, then Joy would be there for that too. That is, the something different she carried through the door on the 8th time. Not a better folder, not a bigger number. A warm pie in a white box, and a 9-year-old girl in her good shoes holding her mother's hand. Friday morning, the bank on Drayton Street looked the way it always looked. The cold marble floor that her good shoes clicked across too loudly. The chairs along the wall where she had waited 7 times and learned the exact pattern of the carpet. The fluorescent light that made everyone look a little sick. Joy held her hand and held the door for an elderly man on his way out, the way Renee had taught her, and the man tipped his head and said, "What a polite young lady," and Renee felt the small ordinary pride of that carry her 3 steps further into a building that had only ever sent her back out. The assistant met her at the door, which had never happened, and walked her past the row of chairs, which had never happened, and did not take her to Davis's desk in the corner where the 7 no's had been delivered. She took her to a conference room with a long table and a window that looked out over the street, and she asked if Renee or the little girl would like anything to drink, and Renee, holding the pie box level in both hands so the weight stayed even, said no thank you and sat down and waited and did not understand. Joy swung her feet under the chair. The pie was still warm against Renee's palms through the box. She had brought it the way another woman might have brought a Bible, something to hold so her hands would have a job while the rest of her was afraid. Davis came in first. He looked like a man who had not slept either. He could not quite meet her eye. He said, "Good morning," and he said, "Thank you for coming." And he started to say something about the bank's review process and the additional consideration the branch had given her file, and the words came out stiff and rehearsed, a man reading a road sign in a language he had only just learned. And then the door opened again, and Walter Hale walked in. He was not wearing the brown coat. He was wearing a dark grey suit that fit him the way a thing fits a man who has worn good suits all his life. And the stoop she had always seen in him at the market was still there, but it read differently now, less like age, and more like a man choosing to come down to the level of the table. Renee looked at him, and for a long moment her mind simply refused the information, because the old man in the brown coat could not be here, in this room, dressed like this, with the branch manager standing up so fast his chair rolled back into the wall. Walter looked at her, and the kindness in his face was exactly the same as it had been every Saturday for 2 years, and that was the thing that finally made her understand that it was really him. "Hello, Renee," he said. "I believe you already know my name. I'm not sure you ever knew the rest of it." He sat down across from her in no hurry, the way he had stood back from her table all those Saturdays. He told her simply and without any drama who he was. He told her about the trucks and about the building they were sitting in, and about the men who ran the bank inside it. He told her he had not known when he asked her the name of the bank in the rain that it was his own, and that learning it had cost him a night's sleep, because it meant that for 3 years his own name, his own people, in his own building, had been turning away the one person at that whole market he would have trusted with anything he owned. Then he told her about Lurleen. He told her about the pie his wife had made for 50 years, the sugar brown to the edge of burning, the one taste he had been chasing across the whole city since he buried her, and how he had found it at a folding table under a blue tarp made by a woman who cut an old stranger a bigger slice for no reason at all. He told her that the first slice he ever bought from her he had eaten alone in his car, like a man doing something he was ashamed of, and that he had cried for the first time since the funeral, and that he had come back the next Saturday half afraid the taste would be gone, that he had imagined it and it was not gone, and so he had kept coming. He said that he had watched her give pies away to people who could do nothing for her. He said he had watched her be the same person on the empty days as on the full ones, and that in 50 years of business he had learned that this was the rarest thing there was, and the only thing he had ever found worth betting on. "They told you 7 times that you were a risk," Walter said. "I have spent my whole life deciding what is a risk and what is not. and I am telling you that you are the safest thing I have seen in 20 years. Renee could not speak. Joy, beside her, was looking back and forth between the grown-ups with the wide, solemn eyes of a child who knows something large is happening and does not yet know its shape. Walter slid a folder across the table. It was not the kind of folder Renee had carried in 7 times. He told her what was in it without making her open it. The loan she had asked for, all 8 times. The amount written in her own hand in a spiral notebook 3 years ago, approved in full, at terms he had set himself that morning over the objections of no one, because no one in that building was going to object to Walter about anything ever again. And more than the loan, the storefront beside the laundromat, the one with the curling FOVAR lease sign, his company owned the block. He had had someone check on Wednesday. It was hers. She wanted it, the first year's rent already handled, because, he said, a woman should not have to pay rent to the man who is begging her to let him taste her pie for the rest of his life. Then he did the thing that broke her. He turned to Davis Pruitt, who was still standing against the wall, and he did not humiliate him. He did not raise his voice or fire him in front of her or make him grovel, though every person in that room knew he could have. He simply said, "Mr. Pruitt, this is Mrs. Renee Carter. 3 years ago she walked into your bank with a notebook and a recipe and the most honest business I have ever been shown, and you told her she was not the kind of person a bank could help. I would like you to look at her, and I would like you to remember her face, because she is going to be your most successful client, and every time you see her name on an account in this branch for the rest of your career, I want you to remember that you said no to her 7 times, and that the only thing that saved you from being remembered as the man who turned her away was that an old man in a brown coat happened to like her pie." Davis looked at Renee. Whatever he had been protecting in himself for 3 years, the smallness he had carried up from the back of every room, it had nowhere left to stand. His voice, when he finally found it, was not the voice of the man behind the desk. He said he was sorry. He said it to her and not to Walter, which was the only thing he could have done that meant anything, and Renee, who had every right to let him stand there in it, looked at him a moment and then said the thing that Walter would tell people about for the rest of his life. She said, "I forgive you, but I want you to do something for me. The next woman who comes in here with a notebook, I want you to look at her like she might be me. The store opened in October. She called it Camille's, after the woman who had given her the recipe and made her learn it with her hands, and she painted the name herself on the window in gold letters, standing on a ladder her cousin Marcus held, getting the curve of the C wrong twice before she got it right. She hung a small framed photograph of Curtis by the register where the morning light hit it first, the same as the windowsill at home, so that he could see the room. She bought the commercial oven she had priced in the spiral notebook 3 years before, and it ran true. No hot left side, no half turn, at the 11-minute mark, and the first morning she used it she stood in front of it and cried for a reason she could not have explained to anyone. Because a fair oven after 11 years of a crooked one is the kind of small mercy that undoes a person more than the large ones do. The line on the first Saturday went out the door and down past the laundromat, and Renee stood behind a real counter for the first time in her life and cut slices and made change and called people by their names, and she had hired 2 women from her own block to help her, women she had once made pies for in the week after their babies came. And she paid them more than the bank had ever believed she could clear in a month. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon she looked up and saw an old man in a dark grey suit standing back from the crowd, watching the way he always had, and she stopped what she was doing and cut a slice bigger than any slice in the place and carried it to him herself, and would not let him pay. Walter came every Saturday after that. He had a chair they kept for him near the window, and the 2 women from Renee's block learned to set his coffee down, without being asked, black, no saucer, the way he liked it. Joy did her homework at the end of his table the way she had once done it under a blue tarp, and Walter checked her arithmetic and pretended to be impressed when it was right and pretended to be stern when it was wrong, and on the slow afternoons he and Renee talked about Lurleen and about Curtis and about Camille, the 3 people who were not in the room and were in the room. He came to Joy's school play. He sat in the 3rd row in his brown coat, the old one, because he said the good suits were for banks and the brown coat was for family. And when Joy forgot a line, he was the one who started the clapping that covered it. He lived another 6 years. When he died, he left Renee a letter and a small thing, not money, because by then she did not need his money. The store had 3 locations and her own name on the side of a van that drove the same interstates his trucks did. He left her a recipe card, the only one he had, in handwriting that was not his. A sweet potato pie, the sugar browned to the edge of burning, signed at the bottom in a careful hand, Lurleen Hale. He had written one line under it in his own hand, shakier now than it had been across the conference table. He had written, "You already knew it. I just wanted you to have hers too." Renee kept it on the windowsill next to Curtis, where the morning light hit it first. People in that part of the city still tell the story, and the part they always tell, the part that gets passed from a mother to a daughter, the way a recipe gets passed, the way a thing you learn with your hands stays with you until they bury you, is not the part about the loan, and it is not the part about the trucks. And it is not even the part about the old man and the wife and the taste he chased across a whole city to find. The part they always tell is the 8th time. The part where a woman who had been told no 7 times walked back through a door that had no reason to expect her, with her back straight and her good shoes on, and a 9-year-old girl holding her hand, carrying nothing in the whole world but a warm pie in a white box, and the stubborn, unbroken belief that one day the sign was going to say her name. It says her name now. It says it in 3 places. And every Saturday, a little after noon, she still cuts the first slice bigger than the rest and carries it to a chair by the window and sets it down in front of no one at all, where the light comes in. If you have ever been told no more times than you could count and kept your back straight anyway, then you already understand the only thing this story was ever trying to say. Tell me about the door you are still waiting on. And if this is the kind of story that stays with you, there is another one waiting, about a man who swept the floors of a building he would one day be asked to save.